Thank you. Thank you, Judith and Karen. So Judy has been a volunteer with CASP. She lives here in Brattleboro and has for a long time, a licensed psychologist with in-depth experience dealing with trauma and international mental health. And the reason that we felt this was such an important topic to address, and many of you who are volunteers and have interacted with our guests already know this, is that these folks come to us having experienced trauma in many different forms. Often, usually, we don't know their story. We don't know what that might have been, but we know they've been through a lot in order to get here. And then we, in turn, have to hold that in some way, whether we hear their story or whether just in our own imaginations, we, are well aware from news of what some of the things they may have dealt with are. So being trauma informed, being savvy about both what we're hearing, what we're thinking, what we're assuming, and also then knowing how to take care of ourselves when we feel some of these things so deeply. And so Judy is going to help us through some of that. And I imagine you all will also have some experiences to share with each other. So for the past 5 years, Judy's been working for a federal agency in low resource countries that don't have a lot of infrastructure and support, and providing mental health services in the aftermath of disasters. So in a lot of ways, the people with us are in similar type of situation. Thank you, Judy. I'm going to let you just take it from there. And I guess we'll just say that why don't you introduce how you want to do the give and take and questions? Great.
Oops, am
okay.
I still muted? Am I
unmuted?
Thank you everyone for taking time out of a very precious Sunday afternoon in May. I appreciate that, and I'm delighted and honored to have something hopefully that's useful to everyone to offer in working with CASP and our guests. So what my plan is for today in the next hour and 40 minutes is to talk about trauma. What is it? How does it impact us? And not to make anyone into a mental health professional, but just to give everyone a working knowledge, because we use that word a lot. So to really understand what is trauma and how it affects us in our brain, our central nervous system, and what is vicarious trauma, what is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Again, it's a term that we throw around a lot and not many people know exactly what that means. So just to help everyone have a working knowledge that hopefully will help build some scaffolding in which to understand interactions and needs and appropriate and useful ways to interact with our guests, who I think it's safe to say we can assume every single person who's seeking asylum in a different country is a trauma survivor, is impacted by trauma, and probably multiple traumas. So then we're going to talk about what helps working with people who are trauma impacted, and then talk about self-care. So for people who are working with trauma impacted populations, how do we take good care of ourselves so that we can sustain that work and not feel the negative impacts of vicarious trauma, and what works for our own resilience strategies. So that's the plan for today. What I'd like to remind everyone is that your number one job is to take care of yourselves while you're listening and participating. So talking about trauma can be traumatic. It can remind you of perhaps if you have your own trauma events that you've lived through, or loved ones or colleagues that you've heard about their trauma stories. Talking about trauma can activate all of that stuff. So please take care of yourselves. If you need to take a break, if you need to go get some air or get a cup of tea or a chocolate chip cookie, Whatever it might be, please take care of yourselves and notice, again, if you're starting to feel activated in a way that's not comfortable for you, that your job is to take care of yourself. I'm going to ask at points throughout the talk for any comments, feedback, questions, and I'm delighted to hear from people. Certainly, there's lots of expertise among this group, not just mine. So I invite everybody's expertise and your thoughts, whether they're in agreement or not agreement, all welcome. But if you have a question at another time, please unmute yourself and jump in. That's totally fine. And if I'm going to cover it in a few minutes, I'll just ask you to put it on hold. But otherwise, if it seems like it'll be useful for everyone to discuss it, then great, that's welcome. Again, we'll all put our heads together and hopefully benefit from all of our expertise and experience. How's that sound? You can give me a thumbs up, thumbs down. Sound good? Okay. All right, so why do we care about trauma? I'm going to jump right in here. Here is a partial list of the kinds of problems that are potentially trauma related that we may see when we're working with people who are trauma impacted. I'm going to just read a list here. Disruptive behaviors, poor tolerance of frustration, depression, anxiety, difficulty concentrating, a lack of focus. Some of us may have felt this recently, right? With our isolating and spending a lot of time on computers and not knowing what's happening in our beautiful planet. Loss of interest in activities or goals, that kind of don't care attitude, that whatever kind of attitude. Stress, relationship issues, anger, angry outbursts, fighting, work problems or school problems, substance abuse, high-risk activity, including maybe sexual promiscuity, drug, alcohol use in a dangerous way, and of course, self-harm and suicidal behavior. So it's not to say that trauma is the cause or the only reason for all of these, but trauma is a stressor that will find a person's weak spot and make it worse. It's kind of a powerful stressor on what's already there, and it will make pre-existing problems worse. So it's often the driving force behind problems. So what is trauma? Here's my definition. Everyone has a different definition. This is the one I like to use. Our brain's normal job is to process information. So trauma is an event or a series of events that overwhelms our brain's ability to process information. So because it overwhelms our brain's ability, and obviously each person, even though we have the same brain components, everyone has a different brain. So what overwhelms my brain's ability to process information is very unique and individual and won't be the same for someone else. But because it overwhelms our brain, it always comes along with feelings of helplessness and powerlessness, right? So a traumatic event is usually an event that causes us to fear for our safety, fear for our life, our well-being. It often comes with horror, terror, a sense of imminent danger, right? So those are characteristics of a traumatic event. Now, an irregular event that's not traumatic, let's say you're just going to the store to buy some milk. Let's say this is pre-COVID-19, when we could just go to the store without thinking about it and buy some milk, right? Nothing unusual happens. That event, we come home with the milk, that event gets put into our long-term memory, stored there. And I like to think of it as just taking a nap. It's just resting there peacefully. If we want to recall that event, we can. We can say, oh, I remember that time 2 weeks ago when I went to the store and bought a carton of milk. But that memory is resting peacefully, right? So that's in normal events. Now, I like to use a food metaphor for digesting, how we digest it. So, when something a little stressful happens, let's say this stressful, maybe we got lost driving to our friend's house and we were late for an engagement, right? It was this stressful. It wasn't horrifying, but it caused some stress. It might take us a little bit of a digesting to work through that stress. Maybe it takes a few bites to process it based on the higher level of stress. When something bigger happens, I'm going to spread my hands past my Zoom screen, this much stress, let's say our dog dies, right? Something bigger. We will still digest it little by little, taking little bites at a time, but we can't digest it all at once, perhaps, because it's too big, too much. So we take a few bites and we digest it little by little so that the part that hurts us gets smaller. And eventually, as we digest it, it gets processed, it gets integrated, and it becomes part of us, part of our nutrition, you could say. And we eventually find some meaning from it usually, and we grow from it. Again, then it goes into our long-term memory. And it's part of our past, right? So along with emotional processing, that when we digest a memory, we're also organizing elements of the experience into a coherent narrative, into a perspective that allows us to move on, right? So for example, if your dog died, you might go through a stage where you say, well, she loved playing outside. I guess there's always the risk of an accident, right? But she'd have been miserable tied up. And we make sense out of what happens. She was a great dog. I'll always love her. Maybe we go through some anger. I'm so mad at my sister. She left the door open and so the dog could run outside and get hit by a car, right? And again, we go through bits and pieces of it, little by little, processing it. And that's the ideal way of processing an event. But when something is so big and so upsetting, it doesn't get processed this ideal way. Because again, it overwhelms our brain's capacity. So what happens is that our brain, and this is automatic, it's part of our brain, it's part of our central nervous system, it's not a conscious process. Our brain says, this is too much, I can't handle it. I know, I'm gonna put it over here, I'm gonna make a nice wall, it's over there, I'm over here, phew, I'm safe, right? So we build a wall that keeps that upsetting stuff over here away from us. And it gives us instant relief, right? So in that way, it's a very helpful strategy, but it's a temporary solution and it's not foolproof, right? So there are some negative things that happen with this automatic strategy that our central nervous system concocts for us. When our stress level gets very elevated, as in a traumatic event or a series of traumatic events, there are over 1,000 biochemical processes that are triggered in our body to help us deal with freeze, that's the first stage, and then fight or flight. So over 1,000 biochemical processes that even make the laying down of memory of a traumatic event different than how we lay down normal memories that go into our long-term memory. But back to the food metaphor. If you eat something that's bad for you, for example, you may be sick for a few days. Your body usually will be able to figure out how to get rid of it, how to get rid of the bad stuff that you ate. It might make you sick, it might make you shaky, but your system knows how to get rid of it. And it'll come out of you one end or the other, right? And in a few days, you'll be back to healthy. But with an upsetting experience, we can't reject it and we can't flush it down the toilet, unfortunately. The only way out of it is to go through it, through the memory processing system, and get it into long-term memory where it's fully digested and fully processed. So even though behind the wall provides some relief, it has its problems. Now, the first problem of this putting things behind the wall is that stuff behind the wall stays fresh. It never loses its power or its impact. So for example, it doesn't lose that power impact until it gets digested. So for example, you might ask someone, and I don't recommend you doing this, but if, for example, I was in therapy with someone who had a trauma history from, let's say, way back in the Vietnam War, right? A long time ago, decades ago. And if they start telling me some of the traumatic events, we will hear things like, it's so vivid, it's as if it happened yesterday, right? Or they'll say, I'm there, even though it may have happened 40, 50 years ago. So that stuff behind the wall stays fresh and it doesn't lose its power. So the other thing with something behind the wall is it doesn't get to interact with what we already know, with our psychological resources that we already have. And so that other parts of us can't influence that stuff. So that's when you might hear, for example, a rape victim who will say, I know in my head I didn't do anything wrong, but I can't help but feel ashamed and dirty. So that head and heart can't get together, right? Because it's behind the wall and it's walled off from our other resources that help us make sense out of events, right? So in other words, that healthy part of us that knows better can't manage to influence the powerful beliefs and the powerful feelings that are shielded with the event behind the wall. So this is a good time to say that that stuff behind the wall is multimodal. So what that means is we might have visual memories, what we saw, what we heard, maybe what we smelled, what thoughts came to us, our cognitions, and feelings both emotions and in our central nervous system, what our body felt, right? So all of those things are part of the fragments of memory that are behind the wall. And one really important characteristic of stuff that's behind the wall is that we're always, as human beings, we're always striving for health and wholeness. So that stuff behind the wall is always trying to get processed, to find an opportunity to kind of jump over the wall and get processed so that it can finally go into long-term memory and take a nice rest. So that if we see any opportunity, any chance to process this information, we get what's called a Me Too moment. This stuff behind the wall gets activated by anything out there in our daily life that might remind us of it. Now, we call those things triggers, right? Anything that happens in our day-to-day life that reminds us of what's behind the wall, all of a sudden stirs up that stuff behind the wall, and it jumps in and says, me too, can I get processed too? And so now we have that kind of me too reaction where something happened in the moment that's maybe like this, but the person reacts really big, a big reaction, because all this old stuff now just jumped in an effort, again, an effort towards health and wholeness, but you get this big reaction. Now, if you don't know that someone was just triggered, this big reaction looks crazy, right? It looks weird, like, why is this person freaking out? Now, sometimes we may know what our triggers are, right? For someone, again, who was raped by someone with a black beard and a big mustache, they may know that anytime they walk down the street and see someone with a big black beard and a mustache, they're going to get that reminder, and it's going to cause them some stress, right? Because all of a sudden that old stuff behind the wall is going to now be activated. But we don't always know what all our triggers are, right? It could be you end up in a crowded elevator and someone is wearing the cologne or the perfume of the person who attacked you. And you start having a panic attack. Why? Maybe you're not even aware of it, right? So triggers can happen with known and unknown starters, right? So the last thing I want to say, and then I'll ask for questions or comments, is I think of these triggers as time travel. Again, something happens in the present moment, and all of a sudden, it's reminded us somehow, it's thematically related. Again, it could be a sound, it could be a smell, it could be a body sensation, it could be a thought or a feeling. Any of those things can remind us of that old stuff that's behind the wall. And we get this, all of a sudden, we're no longer in that present moment. You're no longer in an elevator safe. You are now back, time travel back to that really, really scary, upsetting event, right? So I think of triggers or being activated for people who have trauma histories as that time travel. Something that was somehow related that caused you to travel back. So let's just take a pause there. And if anyone has questions or comments or additions, I'm delighted to hear. So remember to unmute yourself and hop right in. Nope, nobody?
Yes, I have a question.
Hey, Karen.
It's Karen. I'm thinking, I'm teaching English to a person, one of our guests. And, I've done this before, but this is now Zoom. So I don't have the, it's, anyway, WhatsApp, but it's a video piece. One of the challenges I face is that I have, let's see, when I'm face to face with someone, I can feel the energetics. Are you with me? And so now not having that, I don't know how, if there's any, methodology that you've used when you've done this with other people, but that's, to be able to sense, what someone's doing. So that's my question, really.
Great question. And it brings up some really important points, which is that as helpers, as people who want to be helpful to trauma-impacted populations, the very first number one thing that's important, I'm going to get to your question, but I'm going to do a little preface first. The number one thing that's most important is for us to make sure that we are calm and that we are regulated in our own central nervous system. Because people who have trouble regulating their own calm and their own anxiety will borrow our calm. And that will help them regulate themselves. You already know this if you're a teacher, if you're a parent, if you're an aunt or an uncle, right? If you're around people who are agitated and upset and you start getting agitated and upset, it makes everything worse, right? Very simple. Even around a dog or a horse, right? All mammals. We have this thing, it's called neuroception, where our central nervous systems actually communicate with each other before it even registers in our brain. So the number one thing is always to make sure you practice being calm, knowing how to calm yourself down if you notice your stress level is going up. And that will be the number one thing most important for interacting with someone else who has a hard time regulating their own nervous system. The other part that I think is really important is for working with people who are trauma survivors. I like to think of this as an empowerment model. To be trauma informed means that we take a very empowerment model approach. And what that means is, remember I said trauma, because it always overwhelms us, comes along with feelings of helplessness and powerlessness. So we're always trying to help people get back to a sense of feeling their own control over their lives, their own agency over their own lives, their own sense of choice and alternatives that they're in control of. So I like to teach people, and you can do this with Zoom, even if you don't have that, face-to-face sense of how someone is doing, you can teach someone this easy scale, a 0 to 10. And you're going to ask them, it's almost like asking them to take their own temperature of where they are in their stress level. So 0 is calm or neutral, and 10 is as upset as you can imagine being, right? As bad as you can imagine being. So you may have a sense that you've just hit on a topic maybe that's upsetting to someone. Ask them to check in, teach them the 0 to 10 and say, where are you right now? Just take a moment. You can close your eyes if you want. If you're not comfortable, do it with your eyes open and just let them sift their awareness through their body, through their brain. Where are you, 0 to 10? What number would you give it? So again, empowering them to really tune into their own stress level. If it's a 0 or 1, great, you're in good shape. If it starts getting up to 3, 4, 5, it makes it hard to think, right? Our logical cerebral cortex part of our brain doesn't work very well when our stress level gets high, right? So we say, let's take a moment and just do some deep breathing together. Let's take a moment, look out the window, tell me what you see. Do you see any trees out there? Mm-hmm. What do you see on the wall? Anything that will help someone ground themselves into the present moment in their body. Again, remember, trauma is going to take them on a time travel trip. So anything that helps them ground themselves back to the present moment and in their central nervous system, in their body, is very calming. So you can just ask them to put their hand on their heart. Let's do some deep breathing together. You don't have to be a therapist. You don't have to be a neuroscientist. Let's count to 10. Do you need to walk around? Ask them, do you need to take a break? Is it so if it's up at a 7, 8, or 9, maybe you need to take a break. So again, empowering, what would be useful to you right now?
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Judy, hi, this is Edie. I found, and it was more acute when my guest was staying with me, and I'm less in touch, but I'm sure this continues, that they look for triggers. it's not just that a trigger comes. They are online constantly back in Honduras, and they want to tell me all the time about all of the rapes and murders and horrible things that have happened, and they want to go on and on and on and on. And to me, it's sort of self-triggering. And I just wanted you to comment on that. I mean, I've reacted in certain ways, but it's more just the phenomenon of, it's not just waiting for a trigger, it's that somehow that box in there needs to get out, and so it's just going to do it, I guess.
So I would that sounds like a tough situation, Edie, for you and for the folks who are continually getting activated. I would do just a little bit of maybe a little information drop that healing, that trauma is more, the more times we feel overwhelmed, the more times we feel helpless and powerless, that's more trauma. That's not helpful. Nobody needs more trauma. It just doesn't help, right? What we need is healing. So I would, again, ask people to check in. Is this helpful when you are constantly, looking at this news or getting this information? Does that help you lower your stress level, or does it help your stress level go up? Because when our stress level goes up, that's not healing. That's not recovering, right? That's more trauma. Nobody needs more trauma. Now, there is a compelling part of it, right? Who knows what might be going on? Maybe a sense of survivor's guilt. I'm here safe, but other loved ones are still in the middle of it. I feel bad about that, right? I care about them. Who knows? Maybe it's a sense that, I'm never going to be safe, because even here in Vermont, I still see all this bad stuff happening, and it still makes me feel not safe. So I don't know the why that's going on, but I would just stick with the real basics, like very simple. Does this help you feel better or help you feel worse? If it helps you feel worse, what can you do about it? What are some choices you have? Maybe just looking at that stuff for, half an hour a day would be okay. Try it and see, right? Maybe not looking at that stuff before bedtime in the evening. So again, none of us are in a position to be this person's trauma therapist, but you do want to help with containment, because that's a really important, again, trauma-informed approach. We don't know what's in that Pandora's box of their trauma history. And we don't even want to get them to look in that Pandora's box until we know that they have really good set of brakes. And what I mean by brakes are those strategies that help us get the stress level down to a manageable, calm place, right, where we're not overwhelmed again. Because when people get upset and all the old memories come up, if we don't have strategies for containing it or slowing it down that are constructive strategies, like deep breathing, like going for a run, like prayer, right? Yoga, dancing, gardening, it doesn't matter what it is, knitting, crocheting, vacuuming, cooking, any of those things that help us calm down. If we don't have those in place, then we're going to look to strategies that aren't so constructive, like drinking to make those feelings go away, taking drugs to make those feelings go away, acting out sexually, or where I was working in the USAID and US State Department, everyone had a giant motorcycle that they drove with no helmet 150 miles an hour. So other high-risk activities, right, that help us numb out, that are dangerous.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have a question. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah.
So if we have a guest who is relying on alcohol a little too much, do you have any strategies for helping a person who's numbing themselves out with alcohol?
Well, that's probably a whole nother really good workshop. That's a good question. I guess, you know, what I say to people is this helping, or is it causing more problems? Very simple. Again, you know, everyone likes to have a glass of wine to relax.
Yeah.
But if your drinking is causing problems in your work, in your relationship with loved ones or family, or with your host family, or, you know, anything that's kind of causing you problems, then maybe it's not the best solution.
And connected to that, it sounds like you have a number of stress reducing techniques that you might be able to help us to know. It seems like, for instance, having a talk about alcohol and what it's doing, you would want to get somebody in a very calm place to have that conversation at all. So it might be, Judy, that in a future workshop we might explore a number of techniques for just calming people down.
Yeah, we can practice some of those before we end, because we're going to talk about what helps all of you when you're working with folks or hosting people who may be getting activated and maybe activating you. Like some of us have trauma histories, of course, right? Or our loved ones do, or our children do, or our grandchildren, right? So what do we do to take care of ourselves? And I always think, well, if I know how to do this for myself, I can easily teach someone. Like, I know how to do deep breathing. We can all do it together, which we will. And I can easily teach it to someone else. It's not rocket science. Plus, you can Google deep breathing and get 5,000 live, you know, little lovely people talking you through a guided deep breathing exercise, which works, right? They all work. So
okay, that sounds great.
Yeah. Good question. Anyone else at the moment have something else? Okay. So what I'd like to do is just quickly go over what is PTSD, and then have a little break, maybe 5 minutes. Everyone can go to the bathroom, get some tea, coffee, whatever. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about self-care. Does that sound good?
Sure.
All right. So PTSD, the reason I like to talk about it again is that it's something that we throw around as a term without necessarily knowing exactly what it means. So I think it's helpful for you to know, so that it's not mysterious. There's nothing mysterious about it. I think of humans as very logical, and our reactions to trauma are very logical if you understand that there's been trauma. Again, if you see someone who's activated and you don't know that this is what's happened, it could look kind of weird and maybe even crazy, right? But once we know the puzzle pieces, then it makes sense and it's very logical. So trauma symptoms tend to show up not immediately, but often months after a traumatic event. And there are lots of different symptoms that can show up. Most people, well, 50% of people, this is research done in the United States. I don't know about research that's done in other countries, but in the United States, about 50% of people who have reported a major traumatic event will just get better on their own with whatever strengths and resources they have available to them in their lives. So that's half of us. We'll just, from our own level of health and resilience, we'll figure out a way to get back to what was our previous baseline normal before the traumatic event. And about 50% will start seeing some symptoms that will lead them to maybe feel like, I could use some help to get through this. But again, there could be lots of ways that trauma will show up if it's going to be a problem. People get depressed. People get panic attacks. People get agoraphobia, which means they're just afraid to leave home. They may have a hard time eating or sleeping. So there's all kinds of ways that trauma might show up. And PTSD is just one of those ways. It's a certain configuration of symptoms, but it's not the only way trauma shows up. So I want to make that clear. The particular configuration of symptoms that go along with post-traumatic stress disorder, there's 4 groups of symptoms. Excuse me. And again, once you understand a little bit about trauma, which now you all do, hopefully, and I'm sure many of you already knew this stuff, this makes sense. So the number 1 category of symptoms with PTSD is called intrusive thoughts. And all that means is that we think about this bad stuff that happened to us pops into our brain without us wanting it to, right? So it could be popping into our brain in pictures of the event that happened, or sounds that pop into our brain, right? Or it could be nightmares popping into our brain in our sleep. And even flashbacks are part of the intrusive thoughts category. Flashbacks are when you feel as though you're reliving an event. It's not even you're remembering it, it's you're actually in it. Those are pretty rare, but they get a lot of attention and Hollywood likes them, so it's good to mention them. When I first moved to Vermont many decades ago, I had a scary accident on an icy road and flipped my car over down a ditch. I was fine, but shaken up. I had to get pulled out. And that night, when I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep, every time I closed my eyes, I saw a slow motion movie of that accident. That's an intrusive thought. It was unwanted. I didn't want to think about it. I just wanted to fall asleep. So that's an intrusive thought, just very basic, right? The second category of symptoms is avoidance. So again, this makes sense. Something terrible has happened to us, and we want to avoid, one, we want to avoid having it happen again, and 2, we want to avoid anything that reminds us of that event. So for example, if you're in a plane crash and you manage to live, maybe you don't want to see any movies about airplanes. And you certainly don't want to see any movies about airplane crashes, right? Because it will remind you, and you're trying to avoid that bad memory. Maybe you'll avoid getting on an airplane. Maybe you'll even avoid going to an airport, right? So avoidance, again, it makes sense when you understand this, the construct, but avoidance can generalize. And when it generalizes, it can really be very constricting in our life. So for example, a rape victim might say, what we want a rape victim to say was, Uncle Joey raped me, I'm gonna stay far away from Uncle Joey. But what she may say is that Uncle Joey wore sunglasses and a hat. I'm gonna stay away from any guy with sunglasses and a hat. And then that may generalize to, I'm gonna stay away from any guy. And then that may generalize to, I'm gonna just stay away from people, right? So avoidance, again, it can snowball in that way. And again, if you don't understand what happened before, it may look kind of weird. But again, once we understand, it all makes sense. It's very logical. Third category, hyperarousal hypervigilance. And that basically talks about our hardwired into us is, again, wanting to make sure that that bad thing doesn't happen again. So the hyperarousal talks about our central nervous system getting reprogrammed to be on high alert. So it's as if we're still in the freeze, fight, or flight mode where all those neurochemicals are still being produced in our body to get us ready to survive if that bad thing happens again. What that may look like is someone is very jumpy, they're very anxious, they can't settle down, they can't calm themselves down. Maybe they get heart palpitations, right? Maybe they can't catch their breath. Maybe they get really jumpy, like if they hear a noise. Again, that's our central nervous system that was trying to protect us when that bad thing happened, and now is still on that high alert. And the hypervigilance is just kind of that high alert, but it's more with our brain. So we're always looking around, trying to scan the environment to make sure that we're going to be able to see any danger before it happens to us. Again, these hyperarousal, hypervigilance can really impact people's sleep, not being able to calm down enough to sleep well, some people not being able to calm down well enough to eat well or to pay attention and concentrate. Maybe they get anxiety attacks or panic attacks. And the last category, number 4, is numbing. So again, trying to make those bad feelings go away. Now, some people have natural ability to numb out bad feelings, right? You probably know some people like that who just naturally have a good sense of denial. They don't think about bad things that are upsetting. If you're not one of those people, you may find yourself, again, going towards some external source of numbing out those bad feelings if you can't make them go away yourself. Again, that could be alcohol, too much alcohol, too many drugs, sexually acting out, other high-risk behaviors, cutting yourself. So numbing, again, a normal thing. You want to make that you want to stop those bad feelings. How can we make them stop and go away? So any questions about the PTSD? That's the PTSD picture. Questions, comments? Unmute now or forever hold your peace.
What I was thinking is, Karen, I understand that a lot of this happens with people who come back from war, actually, as well, that kind of trauma, and vets have had a lot of PTSD stuff. This is maybe an offshoot, but I understand that there's an adaptogen, or there's a process by which people can lower their cortisol levels, because I understand that cortisol, for this hypervigilant, all of that there are certain chemicals that are, high, and other ones that aren't helping them, basically. That cortisol is high. In your practice, I know this is probably not connected here, but I wasn't sure if people have, I'm thinking mostly the guests that I've met, some of them have been men and some of them have been women. And so I was thinking about some of these guests, whether or not they've been soldiers or not, and sort of, so it got me thinking about this, and having read a little bit about this, an adaptogen that's not a chemical response, it's not a, what do you call it, an antidepressant, or, it's not medical, chemically induced, basically. It's working with the cortisol levels. Does that ring a bell for you?
Well, I'm not, I know about cortisol, and I'm not, certainly don't have expertise in specifically how to lower cortisol levels, but in terms of calming our central nervous system down. Now, our central nervous system is what informs our brain, right? There's a feedback loop between our brain and our body all the time. It's communicating. So when we calm down our body, it calms down our brain, and when we start feeling safe, we stop producing all those stress chemicals, all those 1,000 different neurochemical reactions start slowing down, right? So some of those stress chemicals take up to 2 days to metabolize and exit through our body. But the ways we calm ourselves down are very, very universal, right? One way is when we perceive safety. So the people around us can help provide that. Again, that's why it's so important that we as helpers make sure we tune into our own central nervous system and our own calm so that we stay regulated and we stay calm, so that other people can borrow that until they can find their own calm. So that will help those neurochemicals of stress not stop being produced and start being exited and metabolized through our system. So part of that is eye contact. Again, I don't know the research on Zoom for eye contact. I know in person, eye contact helps calm us down. Physical comfort. Obviously, you have to have permission to touch someone, and who knows when we'll get that again. But in general, a hug will help someone's central nervous system calm down. Just, petting a dog, it lowers our blood pressure and it lowers the dog's blood pressure. Very simple physical contact things that help calm and regulate our central nervous system. Deep breathing. We can be in the middle of a panic attack, and 10 minutes of deep breathing, that panic attack will stop. We'll practice that at the end here. Yoga is good. Running, some people find running. Any kind of physical exercise helps metabolize those stress chemicals out of our body. So if someone is experiencing hyperarousal, hypervigilance, that kind of jumpy nervous energy, get them to exercise. I don't care what it is. Have a dance party, right? Anything that gets you moving is good. Jumping rope, jumping jacks, anything. It doesn't matter. You don't need equipment. That's a good long walk. Anything, again, right, left, right, left. That helps our brain process information. Doing right, left, right, left. Some people find prayer very calming, or meditation, music, right? All kinds of things that are kind of universal ways that we calm down our central nervous system and our brain.
There's the Center for Contemplative Practices in Northampton has a free tree of contemplative practices image that you can get on their web. And I was just thinking about this just as you were mentioning this, and maybe that would be helpful. Thank you very much, Judy. I appreciate it.
Sure. Even just a visualization, I always ask people, can you visualize a place? Can you picture a place where you feel safe and you feel calm? Now, not everyone can, but if you can, and it even could be just sitting on your bed, totally fine. Can you close your eyes for 10 minutes and just practice bringing all of your awareness to your safe place? Just let your whole mind's eye focus on that place where you feel safe and calm. Now, if someone can't, don't worry about it. Don't push them. But even it could be the bed, like I said, or, the bathtub, wherever. It doesn't matter. Sitting at the kitchen table. It doesn't have to be, a beach in Hawaii. It can be anywhere where you feel safe and you feel calm. And just 5 minutes of visualizing that will help us calm down, which is really interesting because Edie, you talked about, watching the news and watching the really negative stuff will help activate us. We can also use that same kind of visualizing to calm us down. That's the good news. So how about we take a little break? Is that okay? 5 minutes. It's 3:12. Come back at 3:17.
I think I saw Nora had a question.
Oh, okay.
Put it up on chat somewhere. Where was it?
Yeah, it's on the chat.
Okay. So, the question is, how do we help someone when we don't even know that person's past experience? We don't have to know the past experience at all. Absolutely not. We don't need to know any details. I think, we can focus more on what's happening right now, right? What's happening right now? And just very simple question, what do you need right now to take good care of yourself. Again, that empowerment model. By the time we're probably 6 years old, we have some strategies that we know work for us to help us calm down. Maybe it's sucking our thumb, right? But whatever, we already know how to calm ourselves down. So I just, again, in the empowerment model of being trauma informed, you don't want them to tell you all the details and open that Pandora's box. You don't know if they'll be able to get everything back in there and be safe. So just simply asking, what do you need right now to help you calm down and help you feel safe right now in this very moment? What would it be? Right? So that's what I would do. So yeah, one more question I see. Judy? You have to unmute yourself, Judy.
I'm getting confused about trying to make people, not be agitated. And it seems a little bit like encouraging them to put their thing behind the wall. So that's confusing to me.
Good thing, very good point. Thanks for bringing that up. We don't want to put it behind the wall, but we don't want the talking about it or the processing it to be overwhelming, right? So once you start getting overwhelmed, that's not helpful. That's more trauma. So if you can talk about a little bit, but again, I'm a trauma therapist and I only do this with clients after I know they have rock solid strategies for calming themselves so that they're not going to leave my office and go hurt themselves or kill themselves. So it's really a matter of, it's a little counterintuitive, and I appreciate your bringing it up. It's really saying, this is really important stuff, but getting overwhelmed again, that's more trauma. That's not helpful. That just feels bad. And it doesn't help us take a little bite out of it and digest it so it can go in long-term memory. Now, that's how we wanted in a trauma-informed approach. That's what we want, is to people take a little manageable size, bite-sized piece of the trauma, process it through, and then that can go into long-term memory. But do you know if the person can just take a little piece, or will it open up the whole thing and all of a sudden they're overwhelmed for a week, for days? We don't know. So even that, I think, is a trauma-informed approach, is saying, if this is overwhelming or if this is getting so upsetting, let's stop right now, right? It's scary to feel like if I start crying, I'm never going to stop. That's not helpful, right? That's like, that's more trauma. So think about containment and think about the brakes in a car. You got someone at the top of a big fat trauma mountain. You don't want to ask them to get in the car and go down that mountain unless you know they have rock solid brakes, right? So they don't crash and burn. So it is a little counterintuitive to the olden days where we thought, oh, just tell me, just feel the feelings, just let it out, right? That's what we used to think. And that's not useful. That's not productive when we're talking about trauma. Yeah, but thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate that. That's a good point.
Judy, can I add a point or add a question? I don't know if it's a question or a comment. This is something, so I'm transitioning from a career as a college professor to working with CASP this June. And it's something that I have dealt with many, many times with students, many of whom have, past experiences of trauma, especially sexual violence. And I find that one of the things that helped me the best was to look at myself and consider power in this case, like who has the power over this story. And often I would find that a student would start telling me something and I would become curious and I would feel myself trying to push them to tell the story because I felt that if I owned the story, it would help somehow. And the best thing that ever happened was that I was able to acknowledge that in myself, that I was trying to own their story, and step back and say, I don't need you to tell me anything at all. You can tell me what you want to, when you want to, but it's not my right to have the information, right? And then we're talking about the process of processing trauma rather than the trauma itself, which is their story and their business, right?
Right.
Yeah, I just, because I'm not a mental health professional, I found that that was helpful to look at my
Yeah.
own motivation in the conversation.
Right. And I think, that also brings up, it's a good feeling to feel like you're being helpful. We all like to feel like we're helpful, or we wouldn't be here on this call, right? That's part of what's compelling about working with people who've been through some terrible things in life, is that we hope that we can offer something that's helpful. And so sometimes it's a little seductive, like you said, Kate, tell me your story. I want to offer you comfort. That may be more for us than it is for them. And, I have worked with people as a trauma therapist without knowing what was inside that Pandora's box. If people felt too ashamed or too upset to share, they can still do the work. I don't, it's important to not let your needs get ahead of what the other person's needs are.
Thanks, Judy.
So one thing Susan wrote, one of the things that re-traumatizes people is the requirement to revisit their past traumatic experience in writing their asylum statements. So again, if you are with that person when that has to happen, you can help them do it in little bits and pieces, right? Take a manageable bite-sized piece, and then let's go for a walk, or then let's eat some chocolate chip cookies, or then let's, watch cat videos, right? Something that helps you re-regulate. And then when you're ready, we'll do another manageable bite-sized piece, right? So again, even if you have to tell the whole story, do it in a way that's trauma sensitive, right? You be in charge. If you want to write the whole thing at once, if you feel like that's best for you, okay, great. You do what you think is best. If you want to do it in bits and pieces so that it doesn't become overwhelming, what do you think will work best for you? Right? So let's take a little 5-minute break, come back at 3:25, and we're going to talk about how do we take care of ourselves, given that this is the context many of us are working in. Okay, so come back in 5.
Okay.
I'm going to start. Some people will join when they join. So welcome back. That was quick. All right, so what I'd like to do is, can everyone hear me? Yeah, okay. I'd like to spend the last bit of time we have talking about.
Judy, if you're talking, I can't hear you.
Uh-oh.
I can hear you, Judy. I don't know about other folks, but you're audible to some people.
I can hear you too. This is Karen.
Huh.
So,
Yeah, I can hear you. Maybe Judy Youngman, there's something on your.
I can't hear anybody.
how about your volume? I mean, I don't know what to say. I wish I could write it down. Can you write that down? Volume.
Sorry. I fixed it. I fixed
Okay.
it. I didn't. I had the earphones plugged in and I forgot to put them back on.
All right, welcome back. We're going to jump in because I don't like to skimp on time talking about our own self-care. So the first thing I want to just kind of frame the context for our own self-care is talking about VT. And I don't mean the abbreviation for Vermont. I mean vicarious trauma. So has anyone heard the expression vicarious trauma? It basically refers to the fact that human beings are herd animals, and that we, just like I was talking about neuroception, we pick up on the experiences of those people around us, whether positive experience, negative experience, calming experience, destabilizing experience. So if you're someone who is hearing stories about people suffering, about the worst things that human beings can live through in terms of traumatic events, you can be 100% sure that's having an impact on you. So if we were all working in construction, we would show up to work wearing a hard hat. Maybe we'd have goggles, maybe we'd have good leather gloves in order to protect us from the potential dangers involved in our work. If we're working in the mental health field or the caring field or the field of working with asylum seekers, we don't have hard hats. So how do we take care of ourselves so that we can sustain this work without it having a negative impact on ourselves? So that's what I'd like to focus on in this moment. Vicarious trauma is just talking about how trauma is contagious. If we're exposed to the suffering of people, it will have an impact on us as well. So how do we mitigate and minimize that negative impact and take care of ourselves so that we can sustain this work and do it in a way that that we feel like we're using our best resilient strategies and not being worn down and used up? So my first thing I'm going to ask everyone to think about, if you have a pen and paper there, feel free to write down. If you don't have pen and paper, just think about for a moment, what are the top 3 things that help you lower your stress level when it starts to get too high and you notice it's having some negative impact on you? So what are the 3 things? What are 3 of the things that you do that help you take care of yourself and lower your stress level so that you feel calmer and maybe more optimistic about the world, about yourself, and grounded? So if you want to write it down, write it down. If you want to just think for a moment, just think for a moment, and then we'll see if anyone feels comfortable sharing. So unmute yourself if you feel like sharing. What are some strategies that work for you? Yeah, unmute and jump in.
I like to take a walk or to do focusing or to listen to music.
Great.
I also like to listen to music and walk, although sometimes just swimming laps, I get into a groove and just, it's almost like meditating.
Absolutely. So again, some of these things are universal. It doesn't matter where in the world we live, what country, what language, what religion, they're just human universals. And one of those is exercise. And again, part of it is because as mammals, we're hardwired to move. We're actually hardwired to walk 12 miles a day. That's what we're built for. And in moving, it helps metabolize those stress chemicals that get produced when our stress level goes up high. So again, any exercise, it doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's something you enjoy doing so that you'll actually do it. That's great. Awesome. Music is another universal, right? We use music as part of celebrations all across the world, both happy celebrations and celebrations of sadness or grief, right? Almost every culture has music to mark the passage of, different rituals, and also to get together as a way of connecting with each other. What else works for people?
Yeah. Am I unmuted?
You're in.
Oh, okay. Sometimes I find it relevant to remember times just after a very stressful situation that I may have gotten out of, and the feeling of having escaped that situation is very nice, remembering it.
Mm-hmm. Great. So kind of, it sounds like maybe, if I'm understanding correctly, getting a little perspective and remembering that you have survived other difficult situations and how good it feels when you've gotten to the other side. So just really getting a little bit of altitude so you get that perspective. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, remembering sitting in the locker room after a game and saying, boy, made it to that one. Yeah, exactly.
Beautiful.
And applying those feelings. Yeah.
Good. Good, good. Who else? Anyone else want to share?
Sitting on the deck and listening to the wind in the trees and the birds.
Right.
Yeah, sometimes I can remember that that something that triggers me is just a trigger and is not actually something bad happening in the moment, or something that's upsetting someone else is a trigger and is not there. It's not about who they really are. It's about a bad thing that happened to them in the past. So it's no longer has its power to be upsetting to me.
Right.
Nobody else has said that.
Yeah, and also physical closeness is often comforting.
Exactly. Again, another universal, the physical contact, as well as that, when we are able to use our brain to remember not to always take everything personally, that's helpful. And giving us a little perspective.
Susie, you're unmuted if you wanted to say something.
No, she's
You were
jumped
unmuted.
I once
Try
had.
unmuting yourself. I think maybe we worked. There you go. Are you?
Am I?
Susie, unmute yourself.
Okay.
And then-
It says that I'm muted, but
Go ahead.
do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
sorry. On the order of what someone says, and I can't quite remember, but there are certain authors that I love to read that that really restore me. Pema Chodron, Tara Brach, John Kabat-Zinn, just a lot of wonderful Rilke, people that I find very nourishing, and or Al-Anon literature, lots of things that are helpful to me when I'm feeling discouraged.
Great. Reading. Beautiful. Judy, did you have something you want to say? You have to unmute yourself. Judy, yeah, there you go.
Okay. In addition to physical closeness with another person, I was taught by a therapist in a situation where I was feeling traumatized, that you can comfort yourself by putting your hand here, like having a baby's head against you. That there's something about this particular touching of yourself that's comforting. And so I found that to be true.
Beautiful. Yeah, very nice. Bringing some compassion to ourselves, and not only in our mind, but also just physically. We can touch our heart, or one hand on our heart and one hand on our belly is also very calming. Anyone else? All right. So how about if we practice by way of kind of winding this down? Would people like to try a little deep breathing exercise together? Give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. Okay, so again, not to turn anyone into a mental health therapist, but it's very helpful for your own self when you feel like you're starting to get activated. And if you're around anyone else who's getting activated, it's helpful to say, let's just do this together for a few minutes. And we'll all feel better. It makes everyone feel better. It works really great with kids also, because kids, their central nervous system gets so activated, and it's really hard for them to calm themselves down sometimes. Like, if kids are having a pillow fight or a tickle fight, and then we say, okay, now go to bed, they're all like completely jangled up, right? So they don't have the resources to calm themselves as quickly as adults. So this is a great thing to teach to any age. And the nice thing is, again, that we all have central nervous systems that have the same parts, and it just works across the universal human beings. So what I'll do is I'll talk you through, and again, you can Google breathing exercise or deep breathing and find 5 million deep breathing exercise. They all probably work. So it's just a matter of finding one that you like and that feels like a good fit to you. I'll talk you through this for a few minutes. And yeah, so let's do this together. So if you're comfortable, I put one hand on your heart, on your chest, and the other hand put on your lower belly. And the lower belly is where we want to do our deep breathing, because that's where we get the relaxing message to our central nervous system that we're safe and that we don't need to be producing any more stress chemicals and that everything is okay. So you can imagine a balloon inside your belly, and when you inhale, you're filling up that balloon with air and inflating it. And when you exhale, you're letting that air out of your belly. So I'm going to count to 3 for an inhale, 3 to hold your breath, and then 4 for an exhale. And we usually do the exhale a little bit longer because that's the calming part of the breath, is the exhale part. Now, if my counting messes you up or it doesn't feel like a good fit for you, just completely ignore it and do whatever works best for you in terms of nice, slow, deep breathing. That's all that matters. So if you're comfortable, close your eyes gently. Let yourself relax and take a nice deep breath in, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, and breathe out, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, release, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, breathe out, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, release, 2, 3, 4. And this time, when I ask you to hold your breath, let your awareness gently float through your body, starting at the top of your head, going all through your neck and shoulders, your chest and torso, your hips, your legs, all the way down out your feet. And notice any place where you might feel tension or tightness, and let all of that go with your exhale. So take a nice deep breath in, 2, 3, hold it and notice, 2, 3, and breathe out any tightness, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, hold it, 2, 3, release any tension, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, and breathe out, 2, 3, 4. And last time, breathe in, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, and release, 2, 3, 4. And then when you're ready, you can slowly open your eyes, return your attention to where you're sitting. Look around the room a little bit. See what you see. Look back on your computer screen. Okay, so I always like to do a little monitoring and evaluation. And I am kind of committed to do no harm. So raise your hand if you feel worse now than you did before we did the deep breathing. Don't be shy, raise your hand. It's good data. Okay, I don't see any hands up. Raise your hand if you feel about the same now as you did before the deep breathing. Okay, some people about the same. That's usually how it goes. And raise your hand now if you feel a little bit better now than you did before. Okay, so this is generally something pretty rock solid. We literally did it for 4 minutes. So again, I encourage you to give it a try for 10 minutes. You'll more likely feel the effects of the calm and the relaxation. And again, you can, ask someone else to do it with you. Over Zoom, you can see that Zoom works. You can do it in person. And if you hated it, the good news is you never have to do it again. So,
We see Dorothy and I were deep breathing, and there's a little white cat sitting between us. We started deep breathing. This cat just crashed and started deep breathing with us. It was amazing.
yeah. So we forget that we're animals, and that, again, our brains and our bodies are in constant communication. And in fact, what we learned way back from Darwin's research is that 80% of that communication is from our body to our brain. 80% of that communication is our body to our brain. And our bodies communicate with other bodies before our brain even kicks in. That's called neuroception. So if you're with someone who's calming down, even a cat or a dog, it helps us calm down. So it's a great strategy. It's very nice. If you're having trouble sleeping, you can do it before bed, or you can do it if you wake up in the middle of the night and your brain starts racing. It's a really nice way to slow things down. Sometimes it's hard to just get our brain to slow down, but if we get our body to slow down, that will slow our brain down. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? So we're about to wind our time together down.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. When you exhale, do you do it with your mouth closed? Do you do it through your nose? Do you do it slightly with your mouth open?
It really doesn't matter as long as you're doing it slowly and gently.
Mm-hmm.
So I just say whatever is most comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing like a, that's not slow and calming, but a slow, gentle exhale, it doesn't matter, mouth or nose. So whatever is most comfortable, yeah. Anyone else? Any other questions from anything we've talked about, or lingering comments, concerns, questions? Okay. Well, I would say that was #1 CASP volunteer training. Francie, do you want to have any parting words? Thank you, everybody, for, again, taking time on a precious Sunday and participating. And I hope you felt this was useful. If not, I think most people have my emails. If you don't, Francie has my email, and I'm happy to answer questions or comments that might come up for you in the days or weeks. Or if you want to forget about everything you just heard and don't have to email me at all.
Right, and just thank you so much, Judy. And I can imagine that in the coming weeks, particularly if, you know, we are involved, any of us are involved directly with some of our guests, that some of this might come back, and maybe there will be a follow-up question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let me also say thank you all for coming, and we will be having a second session, though it's not scheduled yet, but Jessa Harger, who was in on our one session today, and Tristram Johnson, who was also here, are planning a session on cross-cultural understanding and culture shock. You know, what that's like landing in a brand new culture. And then something else that we haven't really fleshed out yet. And it's as new guests come, wanting to do a better job of providing a support group for them, of hopefully other guests who are already here, but to be able to begin to talk about some of these things. What's it like to land in a new place, and what are some strategies? So that wouldn't so much impact all of you, other than it's good to know that we'll certainly let you know when guests have had the opportunity to participate in something like that. So unless there's some final word from anyone else, I think we're ready to end this session, and just thank you so much for coming.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Judy.
Yeah, thank you, Judy, and thanks everybody for being
Thank
here.
you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good
Bye.
session.